Okay, Rich, staying on this Anthropic beat. This last week, they went public accusing 3 Chinese AI companies of running industrial scale operations to steal Claude's capabilities. So, they're pointing the finger at DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, who's behind the Kimi model architectures that we talked about at length, maybe ad nauseum, and Minimax, which, to be honest, I have not heard of before as a lab.
Yeah, me neither, man. It kind of went like under the radar.
Yeah, maybe this was their original launch. They were coming out swinging by stealing Claude's secrets. So basically, what these labs were doing was spinning up fake IP addresses that pretended they were in the US, creating accounts on Claude.ai, just like we would, and then asking the frontier models questions that they themselves didn't know the answers to. Then they would take those answers and put them in their own models' training phases like additional data points. But instead of actually gathering them via like some expensive manual data labeling process or crawling the open web, they just took them from a model that's already been pretty well trained. Do you maybe want to spend some time talking about why distillation in general is so powerful, and maybe even why it seems to have such a sexy, unavoidable allure for these Chinese AI labs?
Yeah, so everything in research recently has pointed to the fact that the most important thing when training a model is the data. We've known this for a long time, but it's really in the last 2 years that folks have really underlined the fact that what makes a good model much better than a bad model is that the good model has access to better data. And frankly, like this is why, neo labs are spinning up, because they think that they have some distinct edge, especially when it comes to the data, that will let them compete with someone like Anthropic or OpenAI.
It's almost like the data moat is shrinking in terms of size, right?
Basically, yeah. So there's perception that it's really quantity is less important than quality at this point. So you really need to find that high quality data, those little nuggets of gold. And if you can train your model on that and not let anyone else see that, then you might have a model that is competitive with Anthropic, if not better, on certain particular tasks. So distillation is this idea that if you can basically get a model like Anthropic's or OpenAI's to write you a bunch of data, that you can effectively reproduce the data set that they use to train these models. Like if you can prompt Chat or Claude, a million times, at the limit, you can actually start getting these models to almost reproduce the data set that they themselves were trained on. And that's worrying for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, because data is gold for them, right? It is their oil. It is what powers their models.
It's also such a big CapEx expenditure.
Exactly. And so they do everything possible to basically limit the ability of people to programmatically have these models spit out the data that they were initially trained on, because that is them losing basically their edge. Their edge. Exactly. And so what they accuse these Chinese companies of doing is effectively, as you were saying, creating a bunch of bots that scrape the data that they were trained on, that these models were trained on, to then themselves use that as training data for their models. And so it's seen as a form of theft by OpenAI and Anthropic. Whether or not that is theft, I think, is a really interesting legal question that we haven't really fully figured out yet.
Especially because usually when you have a conversation with Chat, they actually say that you own the copyright for whatever Chat produces, right? They transfer that copyright to you.
It's so interesting. I think the difference is when you're interacting with Chat, you're not producing trillions of tokens of data.
Totally. So that's definitely like the material difference, probably legally, that could be governed in a different regime. They also have a clause within the terms of service that says that you won't use it to train a model that competes directly with the original frontier provider.
Right, exactly.
So it's like, honestly, it's exactly like the Pentagon case in some level, where it's like this one clause of the red line or terms of service they intend to govern against this like whole wide ranging set of possible vulnerabilities that you could have to leak the data. One thing that I thought was pretty clever is not just the distillation that they were doing of like, it asks some question, it gets some results, you then train the model on it. It was trying to simulate the thinking stream of the model by asking it to reverse engineer what the internal thinking would have been. Because the way that we actually generate these thinking tokens, which is what happens when you ask Chat some question and it thinks for a while, it's actually continuously generating tokens in the background that it's using internally to say, okay, well, if A leads to B and B leads to C, how do we get all the way to F?
Yeah, but they don't let you see that. Obviously.
They don't let you see that, or at least they don't let you see the like real tokens. They might give you some summary view that's just like really top level, because again, that's one of the advantages that they have. And they originally had to train that on thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of examples of people walking through real math problems, real philosophy problems, narrating our internal dialogue, and they use that to train the model to do the same. That was really expensive, like millions.
Getting that data set.
Tens of millions of dollars to try to get that data set from people. These frontier labs are basically trying to bootstrap that same data set by just asking Claude, hey, Claude, pretend you're a person. Give me this thinking stream of actually how do you get from A to F? And I'm going to use those tokens to train my own thinking model. So it is one of these things. It's like very hard to prevent, because if you or I were to ask Claude, okay, walk us through your thinking process, I would want to give a proper answer. And I think Anthropic and OpenAI would probably agree. Like that's a legitimate user query to make. It's when you're in this level of like industrial state sponsored.
It's a gray zone. It's
almost.
like how much data do you have to be asking of these models for you to start collecting a data set?
That's exactly right.
That lets you train your own models.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. It's a really hard question. And at the same time, it's like, because it's in the cloud, they can probably detect this and prevent it. But for models that are open sourced, like, GPT, OSS, if they open sourced, no reason why people couldn't spin this up on their own GPU cluster and do the same thing. So, at the extreme, I think the data sets have been seen as this very like black box system that we very much couldn't get access to from the outside looking in. I think in some ways that's kind of a fallacy. Like, I don't think we yet know technically how to really prevent people from probing the model in a way that gets it to reveal some of this internal data that could then be used to bootstrap another data set. So like you said, it's a really interesting time to be thinking about data as a moat, seeming like it's less of a moat than it once was thought to be.
Less of a moat, but more important than we had initially thought, which is the irony.
Certainly for the quality of the data.
Because for a long time, we were just training these models on Wikipedia and we were like, hey, good enough.
And they were pretty well.
I mean? Wikipedia and like some books does pretty well. But then we realized, hey, actually, no, if we train it on Reddit conversations and how humans actually talk and on movies and on all this other data, that you actually end up with a much better model. So the quality of the data, ironically, is now seen as way more important as the moat has also been shrinking.
Totally.
There's this kind of tension there.
It's a richer moat. The water's more pure.
Something like that.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Aqua blue.
We can put a trademark on that.